Why do we need a key to unlock the stars? This is how one of my students began her speech at our school's annual science fair. She then went on to explain that it was this model right here, the 230-year-old Nebra Sky Key, which she had spent months researching for her project. This artifact from the Bronze Age is one of the most significant archaeological finds ever made in Germany, and has captured the imaginations of many people, including my students, since its discovery in 1969. But what does it actually do? Is it a key to the stars, or could it be something else entirely? Let's take a closer look. The Nebra Sky Disk was discovered by amateur archaeologists in a field near the town of Nebra, which gives it its name. Since then, it has been dated back to around 1300 BC. That puts it squarely in the late Bronze Age, right before the fall of the mighty Hittite Empire and other kingdoms across Europe, Asia, and Africa. We often think of this time period as being a golden age, but in reality, it was also a rather tumultuous period, with a lot of changes happening all over the world. The sky disk itself is just under 32 centimeters in diameter and weighs around 4 kilograms. It consists of two main parts. On top, there is a thin bronze plate, only 1 millimeter thick, which is decorated with a variety of symbols. These include 8 spiral patterns, each containing 3 arms, and 26 tiny holes. Then there is the base of the disk, which is made up of a thicker sheet of bronze attached to a wooden disk. Both the plate and the base were found to be covered in a layer of gilding, which would have given them a shiny gold-like appearance. The whole thing was fastened together with some copper wire, but unfortunately, that disintegrated after a few decades. When the artifact first came to light, the local authorities assumed that they had stumbled upon an ancient UFO. Some scientists agreed, such as Victor Schauberger, who claimed that the sky disk proved that aliens had visited Earth long ago. According to him, the spiral patterns represent flying saucers, while the central hole, through which the shaft of the key would have passed, is actually a hatch for passengers to enter and exit. More mainstream scholars, however, disagreed with his assessment, believing instead that the disk was simply a ritual object used during religious ceremonies. So what exactly are we looking at here? Well, the spiral shapes are likely meant to represent the sun. After all, they look remarkably similar to the sun wheels that are a prominent feature of many Bronze Age burial mounds across Europe. The depiction of the sun is further reinforced by the fact that the disk itself is almost exactly the same size and shape as the actual sun when it is full. In fact, there are some cultures around the world today that still use a similar method to track the sun's position in the sky. This makes sense because even back then, tracking the sun's movement was vitally important to the human race. Agriculture, travel, and daily life in general were all dictated by the time of year and the weather, both of which could be predicted by studying the stars and the sun. But let's take a closer look at those small holes. What are they? If we look very closely at one of the holes, we can see that it isn't really a hole at all, but rather a flat circle. The circles are all exactly the same size, and it's clear that they were punched into the metal using the same tool. Each circle represents one of the brightest stars in the night sky, with each spiral arm pointing towards a different constellation. Using these markings alone, you could have reconstructed the sky at any given date. The sky disk essentially acts like a giant clock face, with the stars taking the place of the numbers. However, you would need a second piece to tell the time. In order to figure out which star constellation faced north, you would need to know the midpoint between the horizon and the zenith. To find this point, you would have needed a simple instrument called a plumb bob, which was used to determine true vertical. A plumb bob is nothing more than a weight suspended by a string or cord, which will always point down due to gravity. By placing your plumb bob at various points on the edge of the disk and following where the string pointed, you would be able to identify which stars were directly above you, therefore allowing you to tell the time. What is interesting about the Nebra Sky Disk is that it predates anything like this by several hundred years. It is quite possible that its creators simply looked up at the sky and saw the random arrangement of stars. They may not have seen constellations at all. Unfortunately, Without a way of knowing the exact date of a particular sighting, the sky disk is useless. But if you had both the sky disk and the observation station, then you could measure the time of day and the time of year simply by reading the positions of the sun and the stars. This is probably why 16 of the holes are marked with the symbol of a crescent moon. As well as telling the time, the moon phases could also be tracked and used to predict eclipses. So far, we've only talked about the Bronze Age sky disk that's on display in the museum. However, a few weeks ago, a new study was published which claims that the researchers have finally managed to decode the Nebra Sky Disk. And what's so amazing about this is that they haven't even touched the original. They have instead worked with a replica and created their own observation station. But how did they manage to decode it after all these years? Well, it starts with a pair of holes. On either side of the disk, there are two large holes that have never been properly explained. At first, the team thought that they might serve as attachment points for the aforementioned handle. But it turned out that the holes were too big and couldn't be properly fastened. However, once they started using the replica and the observation station, they noticed something incredible. These two holes perfectly line up with the cardinal points of north and south. With the aid of modern technology, they were able to observe that the central axis of the sky disk matches the Earth's axis of rotation within 1 degree. There is no doubt that this was pure chance, yet it allowed them to make a groundbreaking discovery. By adding these 2 points to the observation system, they were able to determine the solstices and equinoxes. And just like that, they had a calendar. It wasn't enough for them though, and they wanted to understand the meaning behind the spirals and the small holes. To do this, they did something insane. They hammered a nail through every single hole and left it in overnight. The next morning, they returned to find that dew had formed on the inside of the holes. Because the spirals are concave, the dew collected on the tops of the spiral arms, creating little glowing balls of water. When the sun hit them, it became clear that the pattern of the dewdrops matched the pattern of stars in the sky. However, it was only half of the story. You see, due to Earth's tilt, the stars appear to move throughout the year, so they decided to hammer in nails at each hole again, but this time waited until December to see the results. Once the sun rose, they could see that the dewdrops had reformed and now lined up perfectly with the winter solstice. After doing this on several different dates, they realized that the key to unlocking the secrets of the disk was to read the stars during the solstices. This gives us the exact dates of the summer and winter solstices, which can be used to calculate the dates of other important festivals and events, such as the New Year. All in all, it seems that the sky disk is an incredibly accurate representation of the sky. In fact, it could easily be mistaken for a modern-day planetarium. But that raises another question. If this was a tool used for astronomical observations, then what was it used for? Was it used by a shaman during rituals? Perhaps it was used to teach others about astronomy, or maybe it was used for planning agricultural work. We'll likely never know. After all, astronomers from the Bronze Age didn't leave behind any written records, so we don't know what their beliefs were or how they interpreted the sky. One thing is for sure, though, the sky disk is an incredible example of the scientific thinking of our ancestors. Without advanced technology, they were still able to make accurate representations of the world around them, even after 3,000 years. It continues to amaze me what humans are capable of. Who knows? Maybe one day we will discover the true purpose of the Nebra Sky Disk. Until then, it remains one of the greatest mysteries of the Bronze Age. If you want to learn more about archaeology and history, then subscribe for more updates. Thanks for watching.